San Francisco, March 1962. When Marcus Chen walked into the actuarial department of Pacific Mutual Insurance carrying a wooden box the size of a briefcase, his supervisor assumed he was cleaning out his desk. The company had just installed an IBM 1401, a room-sized computer that could process calculations in seconds that took human actuaries weeks to complete. Half the department had already received termination notices. Chen was 47 years old, had worked there for 23 years, and everyone assumed he was next. But Chen wasn't leaving. He was about to propose something that would make every executive in that building question his sanity. He wanted to race the machine. If you want to understand how one man's impossible challenge revealed the hidden costs of automation that we're still paying today, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling us what you do for a living. Because this story might change how you think about the value of human work. Marcus Chen had been calculating mortality, tables since 1939. Before the war, before transistors, before anyone imagined that vacuum tubes could replace pencils and paper. His tools were simple: a Marchant mechanical calculator that weighed 40 pounds, logarithm tables printed in books older than he was, a system of colored pencils he'd developed himself for tracking variables across sprawling worksheets. The work was brutal. A single life insurance policy required dozens of calculations: age-adjusted mortality rates, compound interest projections, risk factors for occupation and health history. A complex corporate policy with multiple beneficiaries could take Chen 3 full days. He was fast, faster than anyone in the department. But fast in 1962 suddenly meant nothing. The IBM 1401 processed the same calculations in 11 seconds. His supervisor, a man named Douglas Whitmore, delivered the news on a Tuesday. Pacific Mutual was transitioning to electronic data processing. The actuarial department would shrink from 14 analysts to 3. Those 3 would verify the machine's outputs, catch errors, handle exceptions. Everyone else was redundant. Chen listened without expression. Then, he asked a question that Whitmore wasn't expecting. "What happens when the machine makes a mistake?" Whitmore waved this away. The machine didn't make mistakes. That was the point. It executed the same calculation identically every time, never tired, never transposed a digit, never forgot to carry a one. Chen pressed. "Every calculation depends on inputs. Who enters the inputs?" The answer, of course, was humans. Clerks typing numbers from paper forms into punch cards. The machine processed whatever it was fed. And if the punch card is wrong, Whitmore's patience thinned. The company had quality control procedures, verification steps. The system worked. Chen nodded slowly. Then he made his proposal. Let him work alongside the machine for 6 months. He would process every policy the old way, while the IBM processed it electronically. At the end of 6 months, they would compare not just speed, but accuracy, error rates, policies that required revision, customer complaints, total cost including correction time. Whitmore almost laughed. The comparison was absurd. Chen could process maybe 3 complex policies per day. The machine handled hundreds. The scale wasn't even comparable. But Chen had thought about this. He wasn't proposing to match the machine's volume. He was proposing to match its output quality on a sample set. Take 50 policies per month, the most complex ones, corporate accounts with multiple variables and unusual risk factors. Let Chen process them manually. Let the machine process them electronically. Track everything. Whitmore saw no downside. If the machine performed flawlessly, he'd have data proving the transition was correct. And if Chen somehow found errors, well, that would be valuable too. Quality control was quality control. He agreed. Chen would keep his job for 6 months. After that, the numbers would decide. The competition began April 1st. Chen set up his station in a corner of the actuarial floor, deliberately positioned where he could watch the data entry clerks feeding punch cards into the system. His wooden box turned out to contain his personal tools, accumulated over 2 decades. The Marchant calculator, now considered a museum piece. A leather case of mechanical pencils, each sharpened to a precise point. reference tables he'd annotated by hand for 20 years, margin notes capturing edge cases and anomalies that no printed volume recorded. And something else. Notebooks, dozens of them filled with patterns he'd observed over 23 years of calculating human mortality. The first month confirmed what everyone expected. The IBM completed its 50 policies in under an hour total. Chen completed his 50 in approximately 147 hours, spread across the month. The ratio wasn't even close. But accuracy was a different story. Of Chen's 50 manually calculated policies, 48 matched the machine's outputs exactly. 2 showed discrepancies. In both cases, Chen's numbers were correct. The errors traced back to key punch mistakes, a transposed digit on one policy, an incorrect occupation code on another. Small errors that cascaded through the calculations. The machine had processed bad data perfectly. Chen had caught the bad data before processing it. Whitmore noted this but wasn't concerned. 2 errors in 50 policies was a 96% accuracy rate. The machine could reprocess corrected data in seconds. The time savings still overwhelmingly favored automation. Month 2 introduced complications. Chen identified 4 errors, but these weren't simple input mistakes. They were category errors, situations where the rigid coding system forced complex realities into boxes that didn't quite fit. One case involved a dock worker with a heart condition who'd recently been promoted to warehouse supervisor. The new position was technically lower risk than dock work, which should have reduced his premiums. But Chen knew something the coding system didn't capture. Warehouse supervisors at this particular company still performed dock work during busy periods. The promotion was largely nominal. The man's actual risk profile hadn't changed, and coding him as purely supervisory would underprice his coverage. Chen flagged this on his worksheet with a note explaining the situation. He recommended maintaining the dock worker rate. The machine, processing the same policy electronically, applied the supervisory rate without hesitation. Chen was right. 7 months later, the man died of a heart attack while unloading cargo during a holiday rush. The policy paid out, but at a rate that didn't reflect the actual risk Pacific Mutual had assumed. Month 3. Month 4. The pattern continued. Chen found errors the machine couldn't detect because they weren't computational errors, they were contextual errors, judgment failures. The machine performed flawlessly within its parameters, but its parameters couldn't encompass everything that mattered. A woman listed as a homemaker who actually ran a small manufacturing business from her garage, higher risk than the code suggested. A retired military officer whose official residence was San Francisco, but who spent 8 months a year in Southeast Asia as a contractor. Different mortality assumptions entirely. A young couple purchasing joint coverage who were actually estranged and living separately, a fact that changed the policy's underlying logic. Chen caught these not through superior calculation, but through superior attention. He read the forms the way a doctor reads a patient, looking for what wasn't being said explicitly. By month 5, Whitmore was paying closer attention. The error rate on machine-processed policies was running around 8%, not errors in calculation, but errors in categorization that led to mispriced coverage. Chen's manual processing showed a 2% error rate. The difference was costing money. Underpriced policies meant unexpected payouts. Overpriced policies meant lost customers who found better rates elsewhere. The cumulative impact was difficult to calculate precisely, but it wasn't trivial. More importantly, Chen was getting faster. Not faster than the machine, that remained impossible, but faster than he'd been at the start. His time per policy dropped from roughly 3 hours to just under 2. The mechanical repetition was creating efficiencies his body remembered even when his mind wandered. And something else was happening, something harder to quantify. The clerks entering data had started checking with Chen before submitting ambiguous cases. His corner of the floor had become an informal quality control station. People brought him edge cases, unusual situations, forms that didn't fit cleanly into the coding categories. He never refused, never condescended. He'd look at the form, ask a few questions, make a recommendation. Sometimes he'd write a note that accompanied the policy through processing, flagging it for human review on the other end. The machine processed data. Chen processed meaning. Month 6 arrived. Whitmore compiled the final numbers. The IBM 1401 had processed approximately 3,400 policies during the trial period. Average time per policy, roughly 11 seconds of machine time plus data entry. Total computational labor, negligible. Error rate requiring policy revision, 7.3%. Marcus Chen had processed 300 policies. Average time per policy, 2 hours 14 minutes. Total labor, approximately 670 hours. Error rate requiring revision, 1.7%. The raw efficiency comparison still favored the machine overwhelmingly, more than 10 to 1 in volume terms. But Whitmore had also tracked the downstream costs. Policies requiring revision meant customer service time, reprocessing, sometimes legal review. Mispriced policies that went undetected meant actuarial losses that only showed up months or years later. The full cost of each error was difficult to calculate, but conservative estimates put it between $200 and $2,000 per incident, depending on severity. The machine had generated approximately 248 errors requiring intervention. Chen had generated approximately 5. When Whitmore presented these findings to Pacific Mutual's executive committee, the room went quiet. One executive asked the obvious question: could they hire more people like Chen to verify the machine's outputs? Build a hybrid system? Whitmore had investigated this. The answer was complicated. Chen's accuracy came from 23 years of accumulated knowledge, his annotated reference tables, his notebooks full of observed patterns, his intuitive understanding of which categories were unreliable and which edge cases to watch for. This wasn't transferable through a training manual. You couldn't manufacture it. You could only develop it through years of direct experience. Experience that nobody would accumulate anymore because the machine had eliminated the entry-level positions where such experience began. Chen had become irreplaceable at the exact moment he became obsolete. Pacific Mutual didn't fire him. They couldn't afford to. He worked another 11 years, eventually training a small team that served as the human layer between raw data and machine processing. The system worked mostly. Error rates stabilized at acceptable levels. But when Chen retired in 1973, his knowledge retired with him. The notebooks went into boxes. The annotated tables were considered outdated. The institutional memory he'd accumulated dissolved into nothing. Within 2 years, Pacific Mutual's error rates had climbed back to where they'd been at the start of the trial. The lesson wasn't that machines were bad. They weren't. The IBM 1401 represented genuine progress. Calculations that once consumed human lifetimes could now happen between heartbeats. The lesson was subtler and harder to see. Every efficiency gain comes with a hidden cost. The cost isn't always immediate. Sometimes it takes years to materialize, long after the people who might have understood it are gone. Chen understood something about insurance that no machine could compute. He understood that a policy wasn't just numbers on a form. It was a story about risk, about human circumstances that shifted and evolved, about the gap between what people wrote down and what was actually true. The machine saw data. Chen saw people. Today, we process in microseconds what Chen processed in hours. Our algorithms analyze millions of data points, identify patterns no human could detect, make predictions with stunning accuracy. The efficiency gains are real and enormous, but so are the blind spots, so are the category errors and the edge cases and the contextual failures that multiply quietly until they become crises. Every few years, a major system fails in ways that surprise everyone except the handful of people who still remember what the machines replaced. They're not surprised at all. They knew what was being lost. They just couldn't quantify it in terms the efficiency reports would recognize. Marcus Chen won his competition. He proved that human judgment had value the speed metrics couldn't capture. And then he watched that victory dissolve as the very experience that made him valuable became impossible to replicate. The machines do instantly what he did manually. They do it better in almost every measurable way. The question is, what we stopped measuring. Drop a comment below. What skill have you watched become automated? What got lost in the translation? Hit that subscribe button for more stories about the hidden costs of progress. And hit like if this changed how you think about what efficiency really means. Because sometimes the slowest way is the only way to see what matters.